The way in which I write, I hope that you found it an engaging book. It's very dense with information. They say, write the kind of book that you would like to read. This is the kind of book that engages you and teaches you without it being a heavy didactic brick.
I'm Wendy Holloway, and this is Flavor of Italy, sharing the very best of Italian food and wine, lifestyle, and culture. Good morning. This is Wendy Holloway with Flavor of Italy, and I'm back here with Karima Moyer-Nocchi. And I think it was about 3 years ago that we did our last episode together. And we're going to be talking about macaroni and cheese today. Now, listeners, you might be thinking, whoa, wait a minute. Why are you going to talk about a so American dish? Well, it actually isn't. And if you look at the gorgeous book cover, it says The Epic History of Macaroni and Cheese. Look at that picture. You just want to eat it right off of the book cover. From ancient Rome to modern America. And what the inside back cover says is that Karima is a culinary historian specializing in Italian food who teaches at the University of Siena, which is near Florence, for those who don't know. She's the author of Chewing the Fat, an oral history of Italian foodways from fascism to dolce vita. And that was published in 2015. That we did an episode about that, which I loved. I loved that book. And The Eternal Table, A Cultural History of Food in Rome, published in 2019. So I saw this and we decided to do an episode together. And I don't know what I was expecting. Well, when I see that cover, I'm expecting that this is going to be a book full of recipes. Not at all. So what is this book, Karima? Welcome after all that long diatribe from me.
It is a food history book, and I use the dish macaroni and cheese in a variety of ways. Okay, so it is an American culinary icon, and that's a big status. And I would even argue to say that it's the most beloved of the foods in the American panoply.
Agreed.
And because being an icon isn't just about your favorite food. So if you prefer chicken or pizza or hamburgers or apple pie, hot dogs, whatever it could be that represents American food, I do think that macaroni and cheese, it deserves this place because it's so embedded in Americana. But at the same time, the wonderful thing is also the journey that it took to get there. And that does start back in ancient Rome. I trace that back to ancient Rome. So I use macaroni and cheese as a way to take the reader on a certain kind of journey that explores a lot of issues as well.
So, okay, I was going to ask you what your inspiration was for the book. So maybe what I'm hearing you say right now is that you kind of use it as a way to tell a certain story. Or were you thinking, mac and cheese? I mean, how did it happen?
Well, I think with a culinary historian, maybe when people are asking me, do you really like mac and cheese? I mean, it's not that at all. It is the amount of material that can be unearthed by following the trajectory of a dish and the pertinent areas of humanity that reveal something about us, that tell us something about who we are from a position of class and industry, gender as well, women and races. The role of African American women I particularly highlight in this book. So the many places that it's going to be able to take us. One of the important things, and this is what takes us back to ancient Rome, is a connection of meaning, of what the dish actually means to us besides just tastiness, and how it became embedded in our olfactory affective psyche, and that I trace back to ancient Rome.
Yeah, and the Guinness Book of World Records does indeed say that the origin of the dish is Italian, dating back to the 13th and 14th century.
Ah.
And it was first found, or maybe one of the first findings, was in a book, a small book, published originally in Latin, that had this recipe, or what seems to be mostly mac and cheese. Tell us about that.
Well, okay. First of all, people who are writing those kinds of histories are not culinary historians. They're, for some reason, people think that because they eat or because they're writers, they know something about culinary history. Being a culinary historian means holding on to an enormous corpus of cookbooks, of history, of all sorts of avenues of history that food feeds into, because food is the basic stuff of our lives. Okay. So when I go back to Cato in 160 CE, I'm talking about a dish that people attach themselves emotionally, which was a shaped pasta with cheese. Okay. So it was used as a ritual dish on a holiday. Now just think about any holiday and how important those holiday dishes are. Who's making the pumpkin pie? Was it made with a store-bought crust? And all those kinds of issues that come out about a holiday food, and the way you feel when you're eating that. Okay, so what happens then, though, after the first compilation of recipes is we go through, in Italy, an 800-year period of time where there are no cookbooks. Now, for a variety of reasons that might have happened, and I talk about all about that in my book. But then when cookbooks resurface, we see a direct connection between that dish in ancient Rome that I was talking about and the first appearance of what could be construed as macaroni and cheese. Now, what we're calling macaroni and cheese at that time, and we're talking about the late 13th century, so the late 1200s, is
Before the United States was even a
absolutely
thought.
right, as a political concept, right.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about is little sheets of dough that are about the size of the palm of your hand. They're rolled out, and so still talking about a flat-shaped dough, because macaroni was an umbrella term that just meant pasta. Okay, important to understand that a pasta and cheese was the only game in town. We think about Italian food, so many other sauces and whatever, and ways to dress pasta. It was pasta and cheese, whether that was gnocchi, shaped ball, noodles, the little flat pieces of dough, or at that time, also pieces of dough that were rolled up, called macaroni a ferretto today, rolled up on a stick. Take the stick out, you've got the little piece of macaroni, which is a hollowed out piece. That piece was already around in the Middle Ages. Okay, and so that's what we're dealing with at this point. Then you have the development of different kinds of best practices for cooking methods as well. The cooking it in broth, which was expensive, it was luxurious, it was fatty. The emphasis on fat, fatty cheese, fatty broth. You were already getting that sense of comfort there in the Middle Ages.
Exactly. So at its essence, it is a pasta in whatever shape,
Mm-hmm.
with cheese in whatever shape and whatever other addition. So
Right.
that's kind of
Particularly fat. Also, spices were very important at the time. When we're moving on, we also see what develops is a sort of standard. You had the original, the spice mix that was very more popular, a more varied, something I call akin to a pumpkin spice. Okay. It's a spice mixture, but with a little bit of pepper in it too. So a peppery pumpkin spice. And that would be very popular with also we get into some recipes with sugar. Now, in the Renaissance, that kind of pulls back, and we're still in Italy here. Italy is still defining this dish with boiled in a meat broth, which was best practice, with sugar, cinnamon. So the spice mix gets pulled back to being just cinnamon, and then cheese, butter came into the mix as well. And that could have been a cross contamination of it having been brought to England, all of those pilgrims going back and forth, wars, and all of the things that are making food move around. Mobility is very important for getting a dish around.
Yeah, exactly. And okay, so this is much later in Italy, but the Talisman of Happiness, as the translation calls it, and it was just published in English with over 900 recipes like 5 months ago. I'm going to lift it up ever so gently, my copy, which you can see is
Exactly.
really
I have
falling
two.
apart. And, I've got all these like little recipes and notations and stuff from my mother-in-law. I see that this was given to one of my relatives who's no longer with us 76 years ago for Christmas. So it's always been used.
Let me interject here about what's going on with her and the word macaroni at that juncture in Italy, because macaroni is still being used. She has I keep looking upwards because that's where I've got my Adaboni, and I'm thinking and looking at her book. She has the chapter, which if a soup, rice, macaroni, and something else. That's the name of the chapter when I have it in my edition. So those are kind of what are being called, first course dishes, right? And macaroni is still being used as an umbrella term at that period of time so the edition that I would have had of hadn't changed since 1926, right? So macaroni is still an umbrella term.
Yeah, exactly.
As it was in the Middle Ages, right?
In fact, she makes no mention about it as a shape. She just goes into, okay, macaroni, and this is what we did with it.
Right.
And
right.
yeah, mine is also soup,
rice,
macaroni, and rice.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. But
notice also, I like to point out, when I talk about chewing the fat, the really strong importance of soup. And despite how Italians wanted to be, they're still looking to France for their culinary cues, as they had done for the previous 200 years. And France put soup on that pedestal. So macaroni doesn't even get first billing in that chapter.
Well, just to interject a funny little story, I'm just finishing up a cookbook right now, and I even make reference to this. Italians love their soup, their minestra, and it's the classic thing that you give kids in the evening. We have it almost every night, I'll be honest. And it might have just vegetables in it, but more often than not, it has some little form of pasta. But when my Italian nephew, who is now over 50, but when he was a little boy, probably under 10, and his mom said, "What would you like for dinner?" He said, I'd like rice, but I want riso minestrato. So I want rice made in a soupy way.
Right.
So that idea, like you're saying the French have, of soup is really ingrained in the Italian mindset. And I feel, Karima, that it really still is. It's the essence of comfort,
It is.
but so is, cutting back to your book, Macaroni and Cheese, that just kind of very cheesy, creamy sensation. And Adaboni does have a few that I consider to be particularly, macaroni and cheese ish. So she has macaroni in salsa bianca, which is like a cheesy white sauce. And then where it's basically that same thing, but it's topped with a mixture of fine breadcrumbs and freshly grated parm in
And
the
that's
oven. And then,
actually, that is the French preparation.
yeah, and then she's got macaroni with 4 cheeses. So
I quattro
they, I,
formaggi, right.
yeah, I view these as mac and cheese recipes or antecedents.
Absolutely.
We're so close to France. I mean, there's lots of this swapping over and passage of recipes, but
She's coming off of a French tradition when
yeah.
that Italy was becoming insular. Yeah,
But as you point out, where it really, at least the springboard, was really back hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
particularly in the Renaissance, you have that first with Bartolomeo Scappi, 1570, that first baked macaroni dish. You don't have the breadcrumbs on top because that's a French addition, but already baking macaroni. So what you have there is a pasta that is made with dried bread that has been soaked in goat's milk with the addition of rose water, sugar, eggs, then and flour. So you take the bread, squeeze out the goat's milk, and mix that all together, making this very, very pillowy, absolutely luxurious, fabulous pasta that is then layered with a couple of different cheeses. He's got a hard cheese and then provola, which is, let's say, basically the mozzarella bufala. Okay. And so those are layered with more sugar, butter, lots of butter, which people don't think about Italy and butter. But butter was a symbol of class. So the sugar and all of that boiled first, however, in capon broth. Again, that extra fat, a really, really luxurious dish, baked already in 1570. Yeah.
Yeah. So, who did you write this book for? It's not a cookbook. I mean, in the back, in the index, there's not even an index that says recipes where you can go through. And I think you have, I don't know, 15 or 16 recipes in the book, something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But there's not an index of recipes. If you look at the pages, there's some.
It's a history book. Yeah.
So who's your target for this?
Okay. The way in which I write, I hope that you found it an engaging book. It's very dense with information. They say write the kind of book that you would like to read. This is the kind of book that engages you and teaches you without it being a heavy didactic brick. And what I want to show is how central all of these issues of food are to our lives, because for so many years, until relatively recently, I say this and repeat this, history was written as if no one ever ate. Meanwhile, what could be more central to our lives than food? And the many ways that that manifests in influencing our lives, influencing history, and the way that human societies are brought forth. Okay. And I do have recipes. The recipes are there to signpost the way. So in my greatest hopes, I would think that at least people are reading the recipes and making them in their minds, if not in their actual kitchens, because I've created them in such a way that you can kind of play along as you go and experience that trajectory of time in a way that only food history offers, for that complete embodiment, sensual relationship with time.
Exactly. So You didn't then choose these recipes because you felt they were particularly wonderful. They, as you say, signposted an historical element.
Right.
But you must have, I mean, do you make macaroni and cheese at home?
I absolutely do. And in fact, the dedication in my book is to my husband, who has been such a trooper and really had to eat a lot of historical macaroni and cheese, which he loved. But you need to be careful about how much you're eating every week. I truly believe, as a culinary historian, that you've got to have your hands on the food to understand how time is progressing from a culinary perspective. I can't really talk about it if I haven't done the time travel myself fully. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
So it's a wonderful recipe, whether you're making it with sugar, this adaboni, very simple, just cheese and maybe breadcrumbs. It's a great recipe. And as you move through time, different things are going on, different products are available or no longer available based on geography and trade routes, all kinds of things that go on. But here in Italy, it still remains something that you could say is a pure and simple recipe. I think my final thing I would ask you is, how in the world does it end up becoming put in a box as powder in the United States? I mean,
Yes, it was very much the whole history of craft is a born of necessity story. So when he starts off, he gets his first patent for processed cheese in 1916 because people were looking for a something that was pure. There was so much adulterated food, and factory made food meant purity. So this was a cheese, and his slogan was for his cheese, the first hands to touch it are yours. Now just consider how now mouth-watering that is, but that's what people were interested in. He makes a
but
lot
what, Karima, let me interject. Why doesn't that happen elsewhere?
in the trajectory of craft. You have the Great Depression that comes along, 1937. People were looking for how to feed their families with very little money. You've got that processed cheese, which you don't need a refrigerator for, and that's part of the way that it was marketed. Not only pure, but also a long shelf life. Velveeta was already out in 1927. 1937,
I
that
used to love that stuff, by the way.
Velveeta. Oh yeah,
Yeah, as a kid.
oh yeah, it's so creamy. Right, right.
Yeah.
Creaminess and comfort. It just says comfort right there, velvet. So capitalizing on that moment of people in need. Then when the U.S. went into World War II, so that was World War I era with the cheese, and World War II. Then you've got macaroni and cheese on the ration card with the box. You could feed a family of 4 with one ration card, and you could get 2 portions of meat with otherwise with a ration card. It just didn't.
Okay, well, that says a lot right there.
Right. So also the creation of that powdered cheese, there was this idea that the urban situation needed to be war ready. By the time you get out of 2 world wars, you needed to have preparedness at home as if you were in the military. And so powdered cheese is part of that whole concept of something that is a time insensitive food. It's just going to, you got your little package, you're going to be safe. But also worked in with many women entering into the job market. So you had that
Yeah.
box, and it was always advertised as something fast. Fast cooking foods used very little fuel. It had women in and out of the kitchen quickly and families happy.
All right, my very final question to you is, what is your favorite mac and cheese recipe?
I would really like to, one, I would like to encourage people to do the historical recipes. And I love those recipes where the pasta is cooked in the meat broth. You've got a little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of sugar, that pungency of the cheese, making it a little bit saucy. So I really like to recommend those. I've made the Bartolomeo Scapi recipe, which is in the book, several times. Absolutely delicious, crowd pleaser. That one's got the dash of rose water on it, which really shocks some people, but it all comes together and works really well. So I'd like to encourage that. But one of my favorite recipes, because I'm a spicy food person, is the Caribbean recipe, which is also historically very fascinating because it brings together a lot of different elements of time. If we consider also that macaroni as a foodstuff traveled on a ship with Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Hawkins to the Caribbean in their voyage in 96. Okay, this is a long, luscious history, but then Barbados would go on to have what they call macaroni pie, even though there's no crust, have macaroni pie become their national dish. Now, how did that happen? You'll have to get my book and read about it.
I love that Caribbean recipe, Karima, and I'm definitely going to pull that out. And I'm going to try some of the other recipes here too. I really encourage everyone who has some interest in history and loves macaroni and cheese to get your hands on this book. I'll include a link that you can click on and grab the book. But Karima, thank you so much for sharing this. And what a brilliant idea. Thank you.
Wendy, it was great seeing you again. You look fabulous.
You too. We're aging well.
I hope so.
This has been Flavor of Italy. Find us on www.flavorofitaly.com and on Substack, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, always as Flavor of Italy.